The ice rises like a fortress, sheer and endless, glowing faintly under the silver wash of moonlight. Picture it, a wall of frozen stone that is not stone at all, but ancient ice compressed through ages, standing higher than cathedrals, its surface jagged and alive with whispers of cracking frost. Somewhere at the edge of our known world, it looms, stark and impenetrable, as if placed there by hands that were not entirely human. Some say it is just ice, nothing more than nature's frozen monument, but others whisper of something older, something deliberate, something guarding the threshold between the world we know and the world we were never meant to enter. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I always find it fascinating to know. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine standing before that towering wall. The air cuts like knives against your skin, the kind of cold that bites deeper than mere chill. The wind howls as if carrying voices, and the snow under your feet crunches like brittle bones. Every instinct tells you this place does not welcome you. Yet your eyes cannot look away. The wall is hypnotic. Some say it stretches endlessly, circling the entire southern pole. Others claim it is not a wall at all, but the outer barrier of the world itself, an eternal edge holding back oceans, secrets, and maybe even civilizations long forgotten. Ancient sailors told of it in hushed voices when they returned to northern taverns, their faces weathered by salt and frost. They said they saw cliffs of ice so high that the sun itself seemed to scrape against their peaks. But there was always more to their tales, whispers of figures watching them from above, tall silhouettes carved in frost, motionless yet alive. They called them guardians, the silent watchers of the ice wall. Even now, when modern maps declare Antarctica to be nothing but an expanse of ice and desert, the myth refuses to die. Why? Because whenever humanity has tried to define its edges, the edges have pushed back. Think of medieval Europe, when maps of the world were not maps at all, but dreams painted in ink, oceans full of serpents, lands filled with giants, and borders guarded by fire-breathing beasts. To them, the world was not merely unknown, it was defended. The frozen wall carries that same energy. It does not feel like nature's accident. It feels purposeful. Every jagged line looks like a sculptor's chisel, every shadow like a sentinel's cloak. In the darkest corners of human imagination, we wonder, what if someone built it? What if it was meant to separate us from something on the other side? Picture the first medieval pilgrim who heard rumors of this wall, sitting in a candlelit hall as a traveler described the southern reaches of the seas. The pilgrim would not have thought of glaciers or continental drift. He would have thought of the walls of Jericho, of fortresses described in scripture, of the fiery gates of Eden itself. The idea of a colossal ice wall would not have been random. It would have been a boundary made by God, or by something that wanted to play God. And here's the chilling part. No matter how far technology has come, our understanding of Antarctica has remained strangely incomplete. Yes, planes fly over. Yes, satellites scan it. But the continent still carries a sense of forbiddenness, as though there are places where our presence is tolerated only briefly, where the land itself rejects intrusion. Some researchers have written of strange sounds beneath the ice, vibrations like a heartbeat, low-frequency rumbles that resemble footsteps, too massive to be natural. Could it be the ice shifting? Of course. That is the logical answer. But logic has always been poor company in the realm of myth. When medieval storytellers heard of such sounds, they imagined chains dragging across frozen caverns, or hammers striking anvils deep beneath the ice where giants might be imprisoned. The wall was not just a border to them, it was a lid, a seal pressed down upon something that should never be let loose. Think about it this way. Humanity has always built walls for two reasons, either to keep enemies out or to keep something dangerous in. When you look at Antarctica's towering barrier of ice, the question becomes, are we the ones being kept out, or is something else being kept in? Night falls quickly in the polar south, and when it does, the wall glows under the aurora. Curtains of green and violet shimmer across its face, and in those wavering lights, more than one explorer has claimed to see figures. Not shadows, not tricks of the eyes, but silhouettes that stand too tall and too straight to be tricks of ice. Sometimes they are seen walking, sometimes standing in rows, sometimes with arms raised as though in warning. Always silent, always watching. The strangest accounts describe sound without sound. Sailors swore they heard voices not with their ears but inside their skulls, a resonance that filled their minds with phrases they could not quite recall upon waking. One man, recorded in a logbook, now hidden away in a private collection, wrote of hearing the word return repeated again and again until his ship drifted back northward against the crew's will. The ice wall, it seemed, had rejected them. And yet, people still try to reach it. There is something irresistible about a boundary. We humans cannot see a door without wanting to open it, cannot see a wall without wondering what lies beyond. That is why these legends persist, because even if it is nothing more than wind and ice, it feels alive. The medieval mind was never far from angels and demons, and when they imagined the edge of the world, they saw guardians stationed like soldiers in a celestial army. To them, the ice wall was not a natural phenomenon, it was a garrison, and if a garrison exists, then it exists for war. As we glide deeper into this tale tonight, remember that the wall of ice is not just a location, it is a question, towering and unyielding, a question carved in frozen stone. What is it keeping from us, and why? Legends have a way of clinging to places humanity does not fully understand. The farther the edge, the stranger the stories. And when it comes to the ice wall at the southern pole, no amount of maps or modern equipment has managed to scrub away the whispers. If anything, the legends have grown louder, because mystery never dies when it is fed by silence. Imagine a medieval port city at night. The docks are alive with creaking ropes and the heavy sighs of ships resting in the water. Lanterns glow like tired eyes, and sailors gather in smoky taverns to share ale and tales. These were not polished men of science, but hardened souls who had seen things most people could not even imagine. And when their voices lowered, when their stories turned from storms and pirates to the southern ice, listeners leaned closer. Because every tale of the southern edge began with awe and ended with dread. Some claimed to see towers rising out of the frost, like the shattered ruins of a frozen kingdom. Others spoke of colossal figures pacing along the ridge, too far away to touch, yet too vivid to dismiss as mirages. One story told of a crew that anchored near the wall and saw 3 shapes standing on the ice, motionless. At first they thought it was their own crewmen gone ahead, but when they called out, the figures did not move. When they approached, the shapes vanished into the wall as though swallowed by the glacier itself. The northern kingdoms took these whispers seriously. Mariners in Norway told of Isfolk, people of the ice who never aged, their skin pale as snow and their eyes glowing like the aurora. In Portugal, cartographers drew winged giants on maps near the Antarctic seas, labeling them not as monsters, but as custodians. Even Arab scholars, who gathered knowledge from across continents, wrote of a barrier in the far south that no caravan or fleet had yet breached, guarded by creatures whose duty was eternal. And then there were the warnings. Legends are never just stories, they are messages coded in metaphor. Sailors warned never to sleep too close to the ice wall. The wall watches while you sleep, they said, and it remembers who dares to dream of crossing it. Others claimed that compasses spun wildly near the barrier, as though the earth itself refused to point the way forward. If true, it meant that the land itself did not want to be found. But why would medieval minds invent such guardians? To them, the world was already brimming with invisible powers. Angels and demons filled the skies. Spirits haunted rivers and forests. Every mountain was a throne for something higher. It only made sense that the edges of the world, the very boundaries of human reach, would not be empty. They would be guarded. One haunting story comes from a French chronicle dated to the late 14th century. A fisherman claimed his ship was blown southward into waters of thick ice. There, he saw what looked like a gate, a vast opening carved into the wall. On either side of the gate stood beings taller than any man, clad in armor of white so seamless it seemed grown, not forged. He swore their eyes glowed blue like frozen fire, and though their mouths did not move, his crew heard a command in their minds: turn back. Terrified, they obeyed. When they returned, their tale was dismissed as drunkenness. Yet the fisherman repeated it until his death, insisting that what he saw was not dream but warning. Even the church could not ignore these whispers. Some theologians began to suggest that the wall might be the edge of Eden itself, placed there to prevent fallen humanity from stumbling back into paradise. The guardians, then, were angels of ice, seraphs bound to their post until the end of time. Others took a darker view, claiming the ice wall was a prison, built to contain the rebellious watchers described in the Book of Enoch, those ancient beings who defied heaven and mingled with humankind. According to this vision, the guardians were not protectors but jailers, ensuring that what was trapped behind the wall could never walk free again. And still, sailors kept sailing south. Perhaps it is human nature to be drawn to forbidden edges. Each expedition returned with half-mad stories of lights dancing in the ice like candles in windows, of thunderous cracks that sounded like drums, of shadows that followed their ships, though no man was near. Some crews never returned at all, vanishing into the mist. Their disappearance only made the legends stronger, for a missing ship is far more frightening than one that comes back with lies. Fast forward to the 16th century, when exploration was in full bloom. Maps were becoming more scientific, but superstitions still painted their edges. A German map from this time shows Antarctica not as a barren waste, but as a continent ringed with symbols, creatures with wings of crystal, swords of flame, and eyes like burning coals. Were these decorative? Perhaps. But why always the same themes? Why always guardians, never friends? In the oral traditions of indigenous peoples from southernmost Chile and Argentina, echoes of these stories can also be heard. The Selknam people spoke of Howin, ancient giants who lived in the snow and watched the horizon. Their myths describe the farthest south as a place where giants keep balance in the world. If men ventured too far, the giants would rise and push them back. How different is that, really, from the medieval tales of guardians? Cultures oceans apart, yet whispering the same warning. The legends at the edge are not casual stories. They are layered warnings passed down through generations. They suggest that the ice wall is more than ice. It is alive with memory, alive with purpose, and the guardians, whether giants, angels, or icy spirits, are not indifferent. They watch, they decide. Tonight, as you drift deeper into the quiet, imagine those medieval sailors again, their ships fragile against the endless waters. Imagine their fear as the wall loomed ahead, its face glowing under a pale moon. Picture them hearing voices without sound, seeing shapes without explanation. And remember, the strangest part is not that they told such stories. The strangest part is that centuries later, we still do not know if they were entirely wrong, because the edge remains, silent and immense, holding its secrets as tightly as ever. And the legends, they still breathe, just as cold as the wall itself. Maps are never just about geography. They are about belief. They are the way a culture paints its understanding of the world, what is safe, what is dangerous, and what lies in the fog beyond. And nowhere do these beliefs echo more loudly than in the maps of the Middle Ages. Picture a scribe in a dim stone room, bent over a sheet of vellum. A candle flickers at his side, throwing shadows across jars of ink. Outside, the world is uncertain. Plagues rage, kingdoms fall. But here, on this parchment, he holds the shape of the earth itself. The trouble is, he does not know where the world truly ends. So what does he do? He fills the empty space with creatures. Dragons coil along the margins, serpents slide across unknown seas, and near the edges, at the poles, he sketches towering figures, guardians of the ice. One of the most famous examples is the Hereford Mappa Mundi, created around the year 1300. It was less a tool for navigation and more a tapestry of wonder. Jerusalem sat at the center, radiating holiness. But what catches the eye are the creatures that crawl across its borders. Men with faces in their chests, beasts with dog heads, and vast guardians stationed where the mapmaker believed the world ended. To medieval minds, emptiness was intolerable. A blank page had to be filled. And if you didn't know what was there, you filled it with myth. So, when whispers of the southern ice reached Europe through sailors' tales, Arab manuscripts, or second-hand rumors, the cartographers did not ignore them. They etched icy fortresses and giant wardens into their work. In the 16th century Orent's Fine Map, for example, Antarctica is drawn not as the wasteland we know today, but as a structured landmass with mountains, rivers, and settlements. Some scholars dismiss these as fantasy, but one detail stands out. Along its rim are tiny markings resembling watchtowers. They are too regular, too deliberate to be accidents. Could they have been echoes of the Guardian legends? Consider this. In medieval symbolism, walls were rarely just physical. They were spiritual. A wall separated the sacred from the profane, the holy from the cursed. To mark a frozen barrier at the world's edge was to suggest it had meaning, purpose. It was not random, it was designed. And design implies a designer. Even the great scholar Ptolemy, whose works resurfaced in medieval Europe, hinted at a terra australis, a great land at the bottom of the world, balancing the continents of the north. When monks copied these texts, they did not picture empty wilderness. They imagined order, kingdoms, perhaps even guardians who stood watch over that balance. The wall of ice was not just nature's boundary, it was heaven's architecture. The TO maps of the early Middle Ages, so called because of their simple shape, a circle divided by a T, often left vast blank spaces for the unknown. But by the high medieval period, the blanks were gone. Every inch of parchment was alive with possibility, and the southernmost regions, though unreachable, were alive with guardians. Some were drawn as giants wielding spears, others as angelic figures, wings outstretched, shielding humanity from something beyond. The habit of filling maps with guardians reveals something about the medieval mind. They did not separate science from story or fact from faith. For them, to chart the world was to chart both geography and theology. And so the legends of the ice wall, passed through hushed sailor stories, were not dismissed. They were immortalized in ink and gold leaf. What fascinates modern historians is how consistent these motifs were. Across Europe, in maps drawn by men who had never met, we find similar images at the edges. Fortresses, watchmen, winged beings. Was it mere coincidence? Or were they all drawing from a deeper, shared tradition? Echoes of something once known, now forgotten. And yet, these maps were not just relics of imagination. Explorers used them. Sailors carried them on voyages into the unknown. Imagine being one of those sailors, staring at a parchment where the ocean you were about to enter was filled with serpents and icy giants. Wouldn't that shape the way you saw the waves? Wouldn't it make every crack of ice, every strange light in the distance, feel like confirmation? To the people of the Middle Ages, the map was not a guess. It was truth. The parchment told them where the sacred lay, where monsters lurked, where guardians stood. And if the map said the far south was sealed by a wall, then it was sealed. Even now, when we look back, the power of those images lingers. We see not just lines and colors, but memory, a cultural memory that refuses to fade. Because in some ways, aren't we still doing the same thing? Our modern maps may be cleaner, free of dragons and giants, but we fill the gaps in our knowledge with new myths. UFOs at the edges of space, secret bases hidden in Antarctica, shadows that science cannot quite explain. The Guardians have never left, they've only changed form. The echoes of medieval maps remind us that humans cannot abide an empty edge. We must people it with something, whether angels, giants, or icy sentinels. And perhaps, just perhaps, the scribes and sailors of the past were not entirely mistaken. Perhaps they were recording glimpses of something real, something glimpsed at the edge of vision and then lost again in the frost. So the next time you see an old map, look carefully at its margins. Look at the tiny figures that stand guard where the world dissolves into mystery. Ask yourself, were they decorations, or were they warnings, passed down across centuries, whispering of a frozen wall we still do not fully understand? Every generation reshapes its stories. Myths are never still. They shift like ice under pressure, cracking and reforming to suit the fears and hopes of the age. And when it came to the frozen South, the legends did not fade. They adapted, finding new life in the sagas of the North, the chronicles of Europe, and the whispers of explorers who sailed too far. Let's start with the Norse. To the Vikings, the world was already ringed by ice. They believed in Jotunheimer, the realm of the frost giants, where colossal beings made of snow and stone waged war against the gods. For them, the edges of the world were never empty. They were battlegrounds, guarded by giants whose breath could summon blizzards. So when sailors spoke of a wall of ice at the Earth's edge, the Norse mind did not hear glacier. It heard Jotun. It heard giants. The ice wall was not just frozen water. It was the bones of ancient titans, standing watch, waiting for Ragnarok. In Icelandic sagas, we find hints of this. Some tales speak of ships sailing into fog and ice, where voices thundered from nowhere, warning men to turn back. Were these just echoes of storms? Perhaps. But to the Norse Skald, these were the voices of guardians, frost giants speaking through the wind. And if men dared ignore the warning, disaster followed. Ships were crushed, crews were lost, the ice claimed them as if swallowing intruders whole. Meanwhile, in the monasteries of medieval Europe, chroniclers bent over their manuscripts and recorded similar warnings. They did not call them giants. Instead, they framed the guardians in biblical language. To them, the ice wall was part of the divine architecture of the world. Some wrote of angelic wardens stationed at the farthest south, their armor shining like crystal, their wings blending with the aurora. Others whispered of a darker possibility, that the ice was the prison of the Watchers, the fallen angels of the Book of Enoch, condemned to wander in frost until Judgment Day. These two visions, the Norse giants and the Christian angels, may seem different, but look closer and you will see the same structure, a wall at the edge, guarded by powers beyond human strength, keeping mankind away from something forbidden. Whether it was Odin's enemies or God's jailers, the message was the same: do not pass. And yet, as always, the forbidden draws us in. By the 13th and 14th centuries, stories of the southern ice had spread far enough to inspire new legends across Europe. In Germany, minstrels sang of knights who dreamed of crossing the frozen wall to fight alongside angels. In France, there were tales of crusaders who prayed for visions and claimed to see icy guardians standing like saints at the end of the earth. One knight wrote in his diary that he saw figures clad in silver, bearing swords of flame, their faces hidden in frost. Whether real or imagined, such visions only strengthened the myth. Even in more scholarly circles, the legends found a home. Medieval natural philosophers often debated what lay beyond the known seas. Some insisted the ice wall marked the entrance to a hidden paradise, a land untouched by sin, where the climate was warm and fertile behind the frozen curtain. Others argued that it was a barrier built to keep the monstrous races described in old texts, from dog-headed men to giant cannibals, sealed away from the rest of humanity. Both ideas carried the same weight. The ice wall was not random, it was intentional. As the Renaissance dawned and exploration grew bolder, These myths did not vanish. They simply shifted shape. Now the Guardians were not only giants or angels, but sometimes strange races of men, descendants of Atlantis perhaps, or survivors of biblical floods. In Portugal, sailors told of seeing pale figures standing atop the glaciers, silent but alive, watching their ships from impossible heights. In Spain, missionaries speculated that these figures were remnants of the Nephilim, the ancient giants said to be destroyed in the Great Flood. And in England, poets began to weave the imagery into allegories, ice as the wall of death, guardians as symbols of divine judgment. What is striking is how persistent the themes were. Across centuries, across cultures, the motifs returned. Tall beings, glowing eyes, silent warnings, and the sense that the wall was not just ice, but architecture. Even as science crept forward, myth refused to let go. And why would it? Antarctica, even when glimpsed by later explorers, did little to correct the stories. Instead, it deepened them. Ships approached but rarely penetrated far inland. The continent remained cold, silent, and largely unknowable. In other words, it behaved exactly as a mythic guardian would wish. Consider how myths are born. They do not emerge from nothing. They spring from real experiences, the chill of wind, the groan of ice, the sight of strange lights flickering in the sky. These are then filtered through the imagination, magnified, and retold until they become something greater. A sailor sees a trick of shadow on the ice wall. He tells his companions he saw a figure. By the time the story reaches a tavern in Lisbon, that figure is a giant. By the time a monk writes it into a chronicle, it is an angel. And by the time a poet sings it in a market square, it is a warning from heaven itself. But here is the unsettling thought. What if, buried beneath the layers of imagination, there was a seed of truth? What if something was glimpsed on that wall? What if the reason these myths were so stubborn, so hard to erase, is because the guardians, in some form, are real? Norsemen called them frost giants. Monks called them angels. Explorers called them watchers. Perhaps all were names for the same phenomenon. Something that moves at the edge of sight, silent, immense, alive. Something that does not want to be named. As the myths were reborn and retold, they also took root in art. Stained glass windows depicted shimmering figures in white, their arms raised as if in warning. Margins of illuminated manuscripts sprouted tiny sketches of icy sentinels. Cathedrals even carved frozen motifs into their stonework, faces hidden under frost, guardians frozen in time. To the faithful, these were reminders. The world is not ours alone. It has edges, and at those edges, something watches. So the legends of the Guardians did not die. They grew, they evolved. They became part of the very framework of how medieval and Renaissance Europe imagined the world. And even now, when we look at their maps, their chronicles, their art, we can still hear the same echo. A warning carried through centuries, reborn each time the wind howled over the southern ice. There is a peculiar power in the phrase "forbidden lands." It does not matter what age you live in. People have always longed to step where they are told not to go. The more the path is barred, the more the heart yearns to follow it. And so it was with the southern ice. For centuries, sailors, monks, and dreamers whispered that beyond the wall lay lands not only unknown but forbidden, sealed away for reasons mankind was not meant to question. Picture an explorer in the late Middle Ages, his ship battered by storms, his men weary and mutinous. They round a cape and see, far on the horizon, the wall rising like a cathedral of frost. Against it, the sea looks small, the ship a mere splinter. And in that silence, the explorer wonders, what lies behind? Is it simply more ice? Or is there something the world has hidden from him? The whispers say that behind the wall are lands of impossible beauty. Some tales describe green valleys warmed by hidden suns, untouched by time, where rivers glitter like glass and forests hum with strange energy. Others insist it is a prison land, cursed and barren, where the souls of giants wander, chained and howling, their eyes glowing like embers in the dark. Both versions carry the same weight: forbidden, sealed, unreachable. In Portugal, sailors' songs spoke of the Ilhas Encobertas, the hidden isles, lands said to lie behind the ice, where a chosen few would one day dwell. In Italy, poets described southern realms, where marble palaces glimmered under auroral skies, guarded by beings of ice who allowed no mortal to pass. And in the north, Norse sagas whispered of Utgarda, the outermost fortress of the giants, where no man could tread without the gods' consent. The whispers did not stop at wonder. They often came laced with warnings. A Spanish manuscript from the early 1500s speaks of a crew who attempted to climb the wall. They carried ropes and iron spikes, determined to conquer the frozen cliff. Yet as they climbed, the air grew heavy, as though pressing them downward. Some swore they heard voices chanting in a tongue they did not know. One man, halfway up, let go of the rope and fell, not screaming, only silent, as though he had accepted the judgment. The survivors turned back, certain they had trespassed where men were not welcome. Even more unsettling are the journals of a Flemish navigator who claimed that, at the edge of the wall, his compass spun in circles and his men began to dream the same dream. In it, they walked through a gateway in the ice into a valley where a shining city stood. But the city was empty, its streets lined with statues of tall figures whose eyes seemed alive. When the men awoke, their ship was adrift, sails slack, as though the sea itself had stopped breathing. They fled north, abandoning the dream to the forbidden lands. Why do such tales persist? Because humans cannot resist imagining that the unknown hides something extraordinary. A plain wasteland does not satisfy the imagination. But a forbidden kingdom, that feels right. That feels true to the pattern of myth. Every paradise is walled. Every prison has guards. And so the southern ice became both, a wall that held back danger and a gate that concealed wonder. It is worth remembering that in the medieval mind, geography and morality were intertwined. Lands were not just places, they were lessons. The desert taught humility, the mountains taught endurance, and the forbidden lands beyond the ice wall, they taught obedience. To long for them was natural, to reach for them was dangerous. To trespass might mean punishment not from man, but from heaven. And yet, the whispers continued. Each generation carried them forward. Some said there were ancient scrolls hidden in monasteries, describing expeditions that reached behind the wall and never returned. Others whispered of sailors who vanished south, only for their descendants to emerge centuries later with pale skin, strange eyes, and voices that carried the sound of wind. Even in modern times, echoes of these whispers remain. Some conspiracy theorists insist that nations guard Antarctica not for resources, but for secrets. They speak of caverns warmed by geothermal heat, of ruins buried beneath the ice, of beings who have watched since time began. It is easy to laugh at such stories. But remember, once, people laughed at the idea of continents beyond Europe. They mocked sailors who dreamed of lands across the ocean. And yet, those lands were there all along, waiting to be found. So perhaps the forbidden lands too are not merely tales, but truths awaiting their time. What makes the whispers powerful is their dual nature. They promise both wonder and terror. Behind the wall may be paradise, or it may be prison. It may be angels, or it may be demons. And perhaps that is why the wall still feels alive, because it embodies choice. To approach it is to face the unknown. To climb it is to gamble with fate. To pass it, well, no one can say, because if anyone ever has, they never return to tell us. So as you close your eyes tonight and let the story carry you, imagine standing at the foot of that wall. The air is still, the frost glitters like silver fire, and faintly, so faintly, you hear it, a whisper carried on the wind, calling you by name. Behind the wall lies the forbidden land. Will you turn back as so many have before? Or will you take a step forward, knowing the guardians are watching? The choice is yours. But remember, the wall does not forget. Throughout all the whispers, maps, and sailors' tales about the southern ice wall, one image returns again and again. The guardians. Some call them giants. Others call them angels. A few whisper that they are neither, but something older, something that has no true name. Yet, in every account, whether in a monk's marginal note or in the frightened testimony of a sailor, they are described with a startling consistency. It begins with size. The guardians are always vast, towering far beyond the stature of mortal men. Some place them at twice the height of a knight in full armor, others at the size of cathedral spires. But height alone is not what sets them apart. It is their presence. A man may look at a tall tree or a mountain and feel awe. To see a guardian is to feel small in a different way, small in the soul, as though every thought and deed you ever committed were suddenly laid bare beneath their gaze. Their eyes are the detail most often repeated. Eyes that glow, eyes that burn, eyes that pierce. Sometimes they are said to shine like coals, smouldering in the dark. Other times they are described as icy flames, blue-white and blinding, like lightning trapped within stone. There are even accounts of eyes with shifting colors, as though reflecting the northern lights, alive and in constant motion. No matter the form, those eyes do not simply look at you, they look through you. Sailors claimed that when the guardian's gaze fell upon them, their hearts slowed, their voices failed, and for a moment they forgot their own names. Their bodies are harder to describe, for here the stories differ. Some say they are clad in armor of ice, plates that glisten like mirrors, etched with patterns older than language. Others claim their flesh itself is made of stone, or crystal, or a substance that is neither, but something impossible to name. A few insist the guardians are winged, not the feathered wings of angels painted in churches, but wings of translucent frost, vast sheets that shimmer in the pale light like frozen waterfalls, rising and falling with the groan of glaciers. And yet, others insist they have no wings at all, that they move across the ice without step or sound, sliding as if the world itself carried them forward. Imagine standing on the deck of a creaking ship, hearing only the crash of waves and the hiss of wind, and then, without warning, feeling a shadow pass across the moon. You look up, and there it is. Not walking, not flying, but simply there, closer than it was before. Their voices, or perhaps what people think are their voices, are described in fragments, a murmur like shifting ice, a roar like storms rolling over mountains, a low hum that settles into the bones and makes the teeth ache. Sometimes there are no words, only feelings, command, warning, judgment. Sailors wrote that when the guardians appeared, they did not need to speak. Their very presence carried the weight of law. It is tempting to dismiss all this as fear magnified by imagination. Yet the striking thing is how similar the descriptions remain across centuries and continents. A Norse saga speaks of frost giants whose eyes blazed like torches. A Portuguese sailor in the 1400s writes of men of ice, their forms shining like glass. A Russian monk sketches a towering figure with wings of crystal. And a 19th century whaler, long after the medieval age had passed, records in his logbook seeing shadows of immense height, standing still against the ice, eyes burning blue in the night. These are not the accounts of one culture alone, but of many. Perhaps the most chilling detail, repeated again and again, is that the guardians are never many. Rarely do the stories speak of whole armies of them. More often, there are 3, or 7, or 12. Numbers sacred in human memory. They stand like sentinels, each apart, but bound together by unseen order. Never do they laugh or speak among themselves. They only watch. And that, perhaps, is what makes them so dreadful, their stillness. For a mountain may move, and a storm may break, but the guardians endure. There are darker tales too, stories not merely of seeing them, but of being judged by them. In one Italian chronicle, A ship that pressed too near the wall found its sails torn by a wind that came from nowhere. The sailors swore they saw a giant figure raise its arm, and the storm followed. Another account speaks of a captain who fired a cannon toward the ice, perhaps in bravado, perhaps in desperation. The ball struck the frozen wall, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then a crack split the air like thunder, and an avalanche of ice buried the ship. Survivors claimed they glimpsed eyes shining in the falling snow, as though the guardians themselves had cast judgment. Some scholars in later centuries, uncomfortable with such supernatural tales, tried to explain them away. They said the guardians were simply tricks of the light, illusions of shadow on ice cliffs, born from weary minds and desperate hearts. Others suggested they were metaphors, figures of imagination shaped by the terror of the unknown. Yet the consistency of detail remains troubling. People across different oceans and generations describe the same towering forms, the same burning eyes, the same silent watch. And then there are the symbols, carved in old manuscripts, etched in margins, painted in half-forgotten maps, spirals, wings, towers, stars. Some claim these marks represent the guardians. A spiral for the gaze that sees into the soul. A tower for the figure that stands unmoving. Wings for the frost that spreads across the sky. It is as though medieval scribes, forbidden from writing openly, found ways to hide their knowledge in plain sight. Yet the most haunting accounts are the personal ones. Imagine the lonely sailor who wakes at night, steps on deck, and finds the sea utterly still. The moonlight glitters on ice, and there, at the edge of vision, a figure waits. It does not move, it does not breathe, but it is watching. The sailor stands frozen, heart hammering, and then, without sound, the figure is gone. In the morning, the sailor cannot explain what he saw, but the memory remains, heavy as stone. So what are these guardians? Giants, angels, shadows, illusions? Perhaps they are none of these, and all of them. To those who see with faith, they are angels keeping mankind from forbidden lands. To those who fear, they are giants punishing trespass. To the skeptical, they are tricks of mind and light. And to the dreamer, perhaps they are something greater still, a reminder that not all mysteries are meant to be solved. And yet, if one listens closely, one notices something curious. None of the accounts ever describe the guardians attacking without cause. They do not hunt ships. They do not chase men. They do not strike without warning. Always they stand, silent and still, until a boundary is crossed. Then, and only then, do they act. As though their purpose is not cruelty, but protection. Not hatred, but guardianship in the truest sense. Protection of what? That question lingers, unanswered. Are they guarding us from what lies beyond the ice, or guarding what lies beyond from us? Perhaps both. For mankind is ever restless, ever reaching. We climb mountains because they are there. We cross oceans because they stretch before us. And the wall of ice, colossal, unmoving, invites that same defiance. Perhaps the guardians know that if we pass, we will unleash something neither they nor we can control. Tonight, as you drift in thought, imagine them not as monsters, but as sentinels, vast and silent, standing at their posts for centuries, uncounted. Their eyes burn not with anger, but with purpose. Their wings, or shadows, or stone, stretch across the cold, and the wind hums with their breath. They do not sleep. They do not forget. They are the line drawn between the known world and the forbidden. And as you listen to the quiet, ask yourself, if you were placed at the threshold of such a mystery, would you have the courage to face their gaze? Or would you, like so many before you, turn back in silence, knowing some doors must never be opened? When we think of cathedrals, we imagine soaring spires, ringing bells, coloured glass alive with sunlight. They were houses of worship, yes, but also libraries of stone. Every carving, every window, every arch told a story. For the medieval mind, soaked in mystery, rumour, and faith, the church was not just a place to pray. It was a map of the universe itself. And if one looks closely, very closely, in the margins of this sacred art, strange symbols appear. Symbols that echo the very legends of the ice wall and its guardians. It begins with the glass. In the great cathedrals of France, Germany, and Spain, we find panels where saints stand triumphant, angels trumpet, and Christ reigns in majesty. Yet hidden among these holy scenes are motifs of ice and frost. Take Chartres, for example. On the north rose window, scholars note delicate patterns of jagged lines, like frozen rivers, spiraling outward from a central eye. To most, they are simple decoration. To others, they are reminders of a frozen barrier, stretching outward to the edge of the world. In Cologne Cathedral, among the stained glass saints, there is one peculiar figure, tall, faceless, robed in white, with arms outstretched. No name is given, no story attached. Just a presence towering over smaller figures who kneel below. Some historians call it a stylized angel. Others wonder if it is an echo of something older, a figure remembered dimly by sailors and monks, captured in glass by an artist who had heard whispers of the guardians. Carvings tell their own stories. Walk through the cloisters of Burgos Cathedral in Spain, and you will see stonework full of spirals, stars, and wing-like shapes. Some are explained as celestial symbols, but there are others that seem to hint at walls, rows of jagged blocks rising high, crowned by strange, watchful eyes. Were these merely decorative? Or were they veiled allusions to the great ice wall, hidden in plain sight so that only the attentive would notice? The medieval mind loved allegory. To them, symbols carried layers of meaning. A lion was Christ, but also courage. A fish was baptism, but also mystery. So imagine how a mason might encode a forbidden truth he dared not speak. A spiral could be a symbol of eternity, or of the gaze of a guardian. A tower could be heaven, or the frozen wall at the world's end. The cathedral became a riddle written in stone and glass, one that only the curious could unravel. Consider Notre Dame in Paris. High among the gargoyles, one sees not only grotesque demons, but also figures with elongated limbs and piercing eyes. They do not leer like devils. They do not grin like beasts. They watch, silent, solemn, still. Guardians carved in stone looking forever outward. To a pilgrim in the 13th century, they were protectors against evil. But what if they also reflected a deeper memory? The guardians of the ice, translated into sacred form so the symbol could survive. In manuscripts too, preserved in cathedral libraries, there are sketches of lands at the edge of the earth. Some show monstrous creatures, serpents, dragons, giants. Others show walls of ice, sometimes with tall, human-like figures standing atop them. One Benedictine scribe in the 12th century drew a circle map of the world. At the far south, beneath the line of the ocean, he inked a row of tall beings with wings like crystal. Over them, he wrote only one word: custodes, the keepers. Imagine walking into a cathedral at dawn. The air is cold, the incense faint, the silence deep. The sunlight strikes the stained glass, and suddenly the walls bloom with color. Reds and blues and golds spill onto the stone floor. And there, hidden among saints and prophets, a spiral glitters like ice. An eye stares unblinking. A faceless figure towers. You do not notice at first, but once you do, you cannot unsee it. The cathedral itself becomes a message. Even here, in the holiest of places, the guardians are remembered. Why would these symbols appear in cathedrals? Because cathedrals were not only centers of worship, they were centers of knowledge. Monks copied manuscripts, pilgrims shared stories. Architects traveled across lands, gathering ideas. If whispers of forbidden lands and icy guardians were circulating, it is only natural that some of those whispers seeped into the art. The builders may not have understood the full meaning, but they felt the weight of the stories, and they carved what they had heard into stone, letting myth merge with faith. Of course, official church teaching did not speak of ice walls or guardians, but remember, The church was a human institution, built not only on doctrine, but also on imagination. The artists were human too, and they worked with symbols that resonated in their own lives. For a stonemason who had heard from a sailor cousin about strange figures seen at the edge of the sea, what harm in shaping a silent watcher into a gargoyle? For a glazier who had read an old monk's notes about the frozen south, what harm in adding a spiral of ice to a window? To them, it was simply mystery woven into beauty. Yet, to us, centuries later, these small choices echo like whispers. They remind us that medieval cathedrals were not just buildings, they were archives. Archives of belief, rumor, and story. In their stones lie not only the story of Christ, but the story of mankind's fear and fascination with the unknown. There is another layer still. Some researchers argue that the very architecture of cathedrals mirrored the ice wall itself. Think of it. Vast walls rising upward, ribbed vaults like frozen ridges, spires piercing the sky like jagged peaks. The nave becomes a passage through a frozen barrier. The stained glass windows, with their play of light, mirror the shimmer of auroras across polar skies. In this view, the cathedral is not just a house of worship, it is a miniature cosmos, with the ice wall encoded in its form. To walk through it was to walk through a memory of the world itself, ending at the threshold of mystery. This might sound fanciful, but remember, medieval builders believed the church was a model of creation. The floor plan mapped the universe. The altar was heaven. The crypt was the underworld. Why not, then, the walls as the great barrier of ice, and the towers as guardians watching from above? Some modern pilgrims claim that when they stand in a cathedral and look upward, they feel as though they are standing before the wall itself. The height, the chill, the solemn silence. Something about it echoes the descriptions of the frozen south. Perhaps this is not coincidence. Perhaps the builders, knowingly or not, captured that same awe in stone. And so, across Europe, in carvings and windows, in symbols and shapes, the guardians of the ice wall linger. Not openly, not declared, but hidden in the patterns of sacred art. Watching, as they always do. Waiting, as they always have. The next time you enter an old cathedral, pause. Look not only at the saints and angels, but at the margins. The spiral in a corner, the faceless watcher in a window, the tower etched on a capital. Ask yourself, are these merely decoration? Or are they fragments of a forgotten story, carried through the centuries, waiting for you to notice? The guardians are not only on the ice, they are here, in stone and glass, reminding us that some mysteries are too great to vanish. Even when the world forgets, the walls remember. Even when the sailors' tales fade, the cathedrals sing their silent song of ice. Knights were men of oaths. Their entire lives were built on vows. Vows of loyalty, vows of service, vows of silence. A knight without his word was no knight at all. Yet among the many pledges sworn before kings and on altars, there are whispers of stranger vows. Vows that spoke not of earthly battlefields, but of guardians of ice. It begins with the Templars, the order of the poor knights of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, warriors and monks both. They were not merely soldiers, they were seekers. In their travels through Jerusalem, Antioch, and the Holy Land, they gathered relics, manuscripts, and rumors. Some chroniclers hint that among the many secrets they uncovered were ancient tales of the world's edges, and with those tales came the first vows. One story tells of a group of Templars who, after a night of fasting and prayer, claimed visions of towering figures clad in crystal. These beings, they said, stood against a wall of ice, their eyes blazing. The knights believed these were not demons, but watchers set by God himself, and so they vowed, not to fight against them, but to honor them. Their vow was simple, never to trespass where the guardians stand. A strange promise for men who rode into battle without fear, but it reveals how deep the vision struck them. Later, in the chronicles of the Teutonic Knights, German warriors who marched through snowbound lands, there are references to the White Vow. Before riding into frozen campaigns in Prussia and Livonia, some knights swore oaths not only to Christ, but to the keepers in the frost. Their chaplains wrote prayers that asked protection not only from earthly enemies, but from the judgment of the ice. What judgment could they mean, if not the gaze of the guardians themselves? In France, tales survive of a brotherhood within the Hospitallers who bore strange insignia. Their shield showed not only the cross, but a jagged wall beneath a circle of stars. They called themselves les veilleurs, the watchers. Some scholars dismiss this as symbolic, but others suggest they were men who took a special vow to remember the guardians, to carry their image into every battle. If true, this was no ordinary knightly oath. It was a chilling vow linking earthly orders to otherworldly sentinels. Imagine the scene: a dim chapel at midnight, candles flickering, shadows long on the walls. A handful of knights kneel before the altar, swords laid down in silence. The master of their order lifts his hand and speaks. You have heard the stories. You have felt the weight of the watchers. Swear now, by steel and by soul, that you will never trespass where the wall rises, nor reveal its mysteries to the faithless. And one by one, they press their lips to the cross and swear, not only to fight for their king or their Christ, but to obey the silence of the guardians. It is not only the great orders that carry these whispers. In village churches across Europe, knightly graffiti can still be found scratched into stone. Among them, symbols appear: spirals, tall faceless figures, jagged lines that look like frozen cliffs. Were these idle doodles? Or were they reminders of vows sworn long ago? Vows carried quietly by individual knights who had heard rumors from sailors, pilgrims, or wandering monks. The vows were not always vows of silence. Some were vows of preparation. A few chronicles describe knights who pledged to guard mankind in case the guardians ever stepped beyond the wall. One Burgundian knight in the 14th century wrote in his diary of a dream in which a guardian reached across the ice, and he, armed in white armor, stood to meet it. If they come, I will not flee, he wrote. I will keep my vow. Such vows must have weighed heavily. To swear against a mortal enemy was one thing. To swear before God against beings of fire and ice, unseen and unknown, that was another. Perhaps that is why many of these vows remained secret, spoken only in closed chapels, never recorded in the open rule of the orders. A knight might carry such a vow in silence all his life, speaking of it to no one. But when he carved a spiral in the margin of a manuscript, or etched an eye into the stone of a church, he was leaving a trace of his secret oath. What drove knights to make such vows? Perhaps it was fear. To hear of the guardians was to know the limits of man's strength. Even the bravest warrior, who feared neither blade nor fire, trembled at the thought of eyes that could see into his soul. By swearing an oath, the knight found a way to live with the fear. Or perhaps it was reverence. For some knights, the guardians were not enemies, but holy beings. By swearing a vow, they aligned themselves with these watchers, as if joining a greater brotherhood. One cannot help but notice how these vows echo older traditions. The Norse spoke of warriors who pledged themselves to the frost giants. Celtic myths tell of heroes who swore to guard the boundary between worlds. Perhaps the knights were not inventing new vows, but inheriting ancient ones, reshaped in Christian language. Perhaps the guardians have always demanded oaths from men, and each culture found its own way to respond. The vows also had consequences. In some stories, knights who broke them paid dearly. A legend from Aragon tells of a knight who mocked the guardians, declaring he would one day ride south and break their wall. That very night, he was found frozen in his bed, his eyes wide open, frost ryming his beard, though the hearth still burned. His brothers whispered that the guardians had heard his words and passed judgment. From then on, none dared speak lightly of their vow. Not all knights kept their silence. A handful became wanderers, carrying their visions into poetry and tale. Some troubadours sang of towers of ice where angels weep. Some Arthurian romances hint at quests not only for grails, but for lands beyond the frozen sea. Always there is the same theme. The knight who swears a vow must face the unknown, and the guardians are there, waiting. Imagine now the moment of death for such a knight. He lies in a cold chapel, sword by his side, candlelight flickering on stone. His brothers chant prayers, but his mind drifts south, to the ice wall he has never seen, to the eyes that have haunted his dreams. Did he keep his vow? Did he hold silence, or stand ready, or guard the secret? And as his breath fades, perhaps he wonders, will the guardians meet him on the other side? The chilling vows of knights remind us of something profound. The guardians were not just stories told by sailors or images hidden in cathedrals. They were forces strong enough to shape the oaths of the bravest men of their age, to bind a knight's soul, to command his silence, to weigh upon his conscience as heavily as the cross itself. That is no small power. And so the Guardian's watch extends even into the chivalric codes of Europe. Not just walls of ice, not just shadows on the horizon, but vows sworn in blood and steel. Proof that wherever mankind dreams of boundaries, there will always be watchers. And wherever there are watchers, there will be oaths. As you drift in thought, picture it. A knight kneeling in armor, whispering a vow in the cold silence of a chapel. His words are lost to history, but the guardians hear. They always hear. Every wall serves two purposes. It keeps something out, and it keeps something in. When men first saw the southern ice barrier, its cliffs gleaming like frozen towers, they naturally asked, is this wall for us or against us? For centuries, the whispers have wavered between both answers. But the darker tales lean toward one chilling idea. The wall is not a defense, but a prison. Think of the word prison. It conjures iron bars, locked gates, chains on wrists. But the medieval imagination did not need iron. For them, ice itself was the most perfect prison. It was cold, unyielding, eternal. Where iron rusted and stone crumbled, ice endured. And so they began to wonder. Perhaps the wall was raised not for mankind's safety, but to hold back beings too terrible to roam free. In old sermons there are hints of this idea. A monk in Burgundy wrote of spirits bound in the frost, waiting until the day of release. Another in England warned that to trespass beyond the ice was to risk unleashing those whom the Lord has bound with chains of winter. Even Dante, in his vision of hell, places the worst sinners not in fire, but in ice, trapped forever in frozen lakes, unable to move. To the medieval mind, ice was not only death, it was judgment. The question then arises, what lies imprisoned behind the wall? Some said giants. The Bible itself speaks of the Nephilim, mighty ones, children of the Watchers, who were destroyed in the flood. But many whispered that they were not destroyed, only bound. Cast into frozen lands at the edge of the world, chained in caverns of ice until the final days. The guardians, in this telling, are their wardens, ensuring the giants never break free. Imagine a land beyond the wall where titans wander, their footsteps shaking the valleys, their voices like thunder under glaciers, not dead, not living, waiting. Others said demons, not the small imps of superstition, but the great fallen powers, the ones who rebelled before the world was made. Cast out of heaven, too mighty to walk among men, they were sealed instead in the furthest south, their wings broken, their flames extinguished by frost. The wall, then, is no natural feature but the very gate of their prison. To cross it is to trespass into their cage and to risk opening it wide. Still others imagined something stranger. Not giants, not demons, but memories of another world. One legend speaks of a race of shining beings, neither human nor angel, who taught men forbidden knowledge. When their pride grew, they were cast into exile, not to the underworld, but to lands behind the southern ice. There they remain, their knowledge sealed with them, until man dares to break the wall and release wisdom that should never have been known. A prison not only of bodies, but of secrets. Stories of prisons always carry warnings, and so do these. In one chronicle from the 13th century, a ship from Genoa is said to have sailed farther south than any before. The crew found a narrow fjord in the ice, a place where the walls seemed to part. They anchored and went ashore, climbing the frozen cliffs. There in the silence, they heard a sound, a groaning, as of something vast turning in its sleep. The ice shook. The men fled back to their ship. Only one returned to tell the tale, and he swore he had seen eyes glowing deep within the glacier, like lamps behind frosted glass. To him, it was proof. The wall was alive, and what lay within strained against it. Other tales speak of cracks. Not ordinary cracks, but fissures that bled heat. Sailors told of places where the ice hissed and steamed, as though fires burned on the other side. Some swore they heard voices drifting through those fissures, murmurs in tongues not spoken by men, voices begging, commanding, or mocking. These were not the whispers of the wind, but the speech of prisoners pressing against their cage. The guardians, in this vision, are not protectors of paradise, but wardens of the condemned. Their stillness is not indifference, but vigilance. They do not move because they must not move. They must stand watch, forever, to ensure that what is bound remains bound. Their eyes burn not with cruelty, but with the fire of eternal vigilance. There are even darker interpretations. Some suggested that the guardians themselves are the prisoners, beings condemned to stand eternally, never to move, never to rest, chained to their posts by judgment older than the world. Their very bodies form part of the wall. Their eyes burn because they are tormented. Their wings shimmer because they are frozen mid-motion. Their silence is not choice, but punishment. To look upon them is to see imprisonment embodied. Why would such a prison exist at the edge of the world? Because boundaries are always where danger is cast. In myths across cultures, prisons for gods and monsters are placed at the margins. Loki is bound beneath the earth. The Titans are chained in Tartarus. The Nephilim are held in pits of shadow, always at the edge, always beyond reach. So too the southern ice, so far that few could approach, so vast that none could escape. If the wall is indeed a prison, then mankind's voyages south are not acts of discovery, but trespasses into a cosmic jail. Imagine prisoners who have sat in silence for thousands of years, their rage cooled into frost, their chains grown into their very bones. Imagine the moment when they hear footsteps above them, voices of men drawing near. Would they not strain harder, claw louder, whisper stronger through the cracks? Perhaps that is why sailors returned with haunted eyes, why some swore they dreamed the same dreams as their crewmates. They had brushed against the minds of the imprisoned. And yet, there is another possibility, more unsettling still. What if the wall is not a prison for demons or giants, but for us? What if mankind itself was placed on this side of the barrier, kept from a greater world beyond? In this telling, the guardians are not keeping them in, they are keeping us out. Our world, small and fragile, is the prison. The wall is our bars, and the land beyond, lush and vast, is the freedom we have been denied. Such thoughts tormented certain mystics. A Franciscan friar in the 14th century wrote of a dream in which he saw the earth as a vast circle enclosed by shining walls. Beyond the wall was a garden, endless and golden, filled with rivers and light. But man was trapped inside, condemned to toil and war, never allowed to pass. He woke weeping, convinced that life itself was a sentence, and the guardians were our jailers. This flips the story. The wall is no longer protecting us, it is confining us. And the guardians are no longer noble watchers, but wardens of our cage. Are they cruel or merciful? Perhaps they know that if mankind were to enter the lands beyond, we would destroy them, as we have destroyed so much else. Perhaps the wall is not punishment, but protection from ourselves. In either vision, the wall as prison chills the soul, for it means that the vast whiteness we see is not empty, but full of captives, full of secrets, full of chains rattling in the dark. Whether those captives are giants, demons, angels, or even ourselves, the result is the same. The wall is not silent. It groans, it remembers, it waits. And so the guardians remain, their forms etched in rumor and stone, their eyes blazing in the night, not to invite us in, not to guide us, but to remind us. There are places where man must not tread. There are prisons we cannot open without opening doom itself. Tonight, as you drift into thought, imagine standing at the foot of that vast white wall. The wind bites your face, the ice cracks like thunder, and from deep within, you hear it. A sound like chains shifting, like voices murmuring in forgotten tongues. The guardians stand above you, eyes aflame, warning, do not cross, do not open. This wall is not for climbing. It is a prison. And in your heart, you know the truth. The prisoners are still inside. The legends are many, but two rise above the rest. Some say the wall imprisons giants, others that it chains the fallen angels themselves. The debate is old, stretching back through centuries of monks, sailors, and mystics. Even today, when one stares into the endless white of Antarctica, the question still hangs. What sleeps within the ice? Flesh of giant men, or the spirits of heaven's traitors? Both visions are terrifying, but they are not the same. The tale of the giants begins in Scripture. In the book of Genesis, it is written that the sons of God took daughters of men, and their offspring were mighty ones, men of renown. These were the Nephilim, vast in stature, strong beyond measure, violent in their hunger. They filled the earth with blood, and God judged the world with a flood. Yet in the centuries after, whispers grew that the Nephilim did not all perish. Some were drowned, but others were bound. Some were hurled into darkness, but others were frozen in the southernmost ice. The flood covered the earth, but perhaps the ice rose as well, swallowing giants whole and locking them in crystal prisons. Imagine them, bodies the height of towers, skin pale with frost, hair frozen stiff, eyes still glowing under the ice. Their breaths would be like storms if they woke. Their fists could crush villages. Their hunger would be endless, for giants were always described as devourers, devourers of beasts, of crops, of men. Medieval chroniclers repeated stories of bones discovered in distant lands, bones too large to be human. Knights returned from crusades with tales of skulls the size of barrels, rib cages wider than cottages. Were these remnants of the Nephilim? To many, the evidence was undeniable, and if their bones remained here, why not their living flesh, sealed elsewhere? Some even claimed that earthquakes and volcanic eruptions were not movements of the earth, but stirrings of giants deep below. The wall of Antarctica, then, was the lid of their coffin. But coffins are not forever. The other vision is darker still. It begins not with flesh, but with spirit. In ancient Jewish writings outside the Bible, books like Enoch, the story is told in greater detail. 200 watchers descended upon Mount Hermon, taking wives from among mankind. They taught forbidden knowledge, enchantments, weapon making, the reading of the stars. And for this rebellion, they were cast down. Some were hurled into pits of shadow beneath the earth. Others, say the old traditions, were bound in ice, far from the warmth of the sun, where their wings froze, and their voices were silenced by frost. These are not giants of flesh, but beings of fire and thought, clothed in glory once, now wrapped in chains. The guardians, in this telling, are not simply watchers. They are jailers, holding back angels whose rebellion shook the heavens themselves. What power would such beings wield if freed? They are not merely hungry like giants, they are cunning. They would whisper to men, tempt kings, bring kingdoms under their sway. Their strength lies not only in their form, but in their wisdom. To medieval theologians, this was more frightening than any giant. For how can a sword strike down a spirit? How can walls of stone, or even ice, hold back a being who once flew among the stars. The wall, then, must be no ordinary ice, but a divine seal, stronger than iron, colder than judgment. Through the centuries, monks debated which vision was true. Some argued passionately for giants, pointing to bones and legends of vast men in far lands. Others held firmly to the fallen angels, citing scripture and the writings of the Church Fathers. At times, the two visions blurred together. Were not the Nephilim themselves the children of angels? If their fathers were imprisoned, perhaps their sons were too. Perhaps the wall held both, the Watchers in spirit, their monstrous offspring in flesh. Imagine caverns beneath the ice, where pale giants slumber in one chamber, while fiery angels writhe in another. Flesh and spirit, chained side by side. In certain cathedral carvings, this dual vision can be seen. In the margins of illuminated manuscripts, artists painted towering men frozen in glaciers, while winged forms hovered above them, twisted and bound. The monks who gazed at these images would have seen the same truth. The prison was layered, and both captives were locked within. What then would happen if the wall broke? If giants awoke, their fury would be immediate. Cities would fall like sandcastles before the tide. Armies would be crushed beneath their feet. The old legends say that one giant could drink rivers dry, another could tear mountains apart. Imagine such beings walking free after thousands of years of hunger. They would not come in peace. But if the fallen angels awoke, the danger would be subtler, slower, deeper. They would not crush with fists. They would whisper with tongues. They would walk unseen, sowing lies, stirring hatred, teaching forbidden arts once more. Kingdoms would collapse not from brute force, but from within. Science itself might warp, as knowledge long hidden was poured out upon mankind. One danger is brute destruction. The other is corruption. One ends the body. The other ends the soul. Which is worse? That question haunted many a theologian. Some feared giants, others angels, but the wisest feared both. There are scattered accounts from sailors who swore they had encountered evidence of one or the other. A Portuguese navigator wrote of icebergs shaped like men, taller than cathedrals, their features eerily human. He believed he had seen the frozen giants themselves, their faces pressed against the glassy walls of the ice. His crew begged him to turn back, and when he refused, a storm shattered his ship. Only fragments of his log remain. A monk in Venice recorded the confession of a dying sailor who claimed he had heard voices on the wind while sailing near the far south. These voices did not sound human. They spoke in languages he did not know, yet he understood their meaning. Release us. To him, they were angels, chained in frost, their speech still carrying across leagues of snow. He died raving that their whispers had followed him home. Perhaps both are true. Perhaps the wall is not merely a prison, but a battlefield. Giants and angels chained together, struggling in silence beneath the ice. The groans heard by sailors may be the echoes of their endless war, flesh against spirit, brute against cunning, each seeking dominance even in chains. The guardians, then, are not only jailers but peacekeepers, holding the balance so that neither side breaks free to claim the world. If so, then mankind lives in the pause of a cosmic struggle. The wall is not permanent. It is only the thin line between now and catastrophe. To the men of the Middle Ages, the debate was not only about what lay beyond the ice, but about the nature of sin. Giants represented excess, gluttony, violence, lust for power. Fallen angels represented pride, disobedience, corruption of wisdom. Both were warnings. Do not grow too large in body. Do not grow too proud in spirit. For either way, you end in chains. And so sermons thundered. Look to the wall. There lie the proud and the violent, frozen together, waiting for judgment. Do not follow them, lest you share their fate. The imagery was powerful. Villagers who had never seen the sea still trembled at the idea of beings locked in ice. Children whispered that the cracking of ponds in winter was the sound of little giants shifting beneath. The prison of the South became a symbol etched into the medieval imagination. Giants or angels, flesh or spirit, hunger or pride. The question was never fully answered. Perhaps it cannot be. Perhaps the wall hides both, and more besides. But in the end, the meaning remains the same. There are beings bound beyond our reach, sealed in frost, older than empires, waiting for the day when chains will snap and ice will shatter. The guardians stand not as decoration, but as necessity. They remind us that our world is fragile, our time borrowed, our peace a thin veil over ancient danger. So next time you imagine the frozen wall of Antarctica, do not picture silence alone. Picture the weight of bodies entombed, the burning of wings crushed in frost, the groaning of titans, the whispers of angels. Giants and fallen ones, side by side, their prisons stretching farther than any eye can see. And above them, still and eternal, the guardians watch. Every legend gathers keepers. Every mystery, once whispered, is eventually written in secret codes, guarded by hands that promise never to let the truth escape. So it was with the ice wall. For though most of the world dismissed it as myth, certain brotherhoods treated it not as story, but as sacred fact. They believed the guardians of the southern wall were real, and that they themselves had been chosen to inherit fragments of that hidden knowledge. From these fragments, whole societies were born. In medieval Europe, guilds of stonemasons shaped cathedrals, castles, and bridges. Their craft was holy, for stone was the language of eternity. Yet within those guilds, whispers began, symbols carved into cornerstones, markings hidden in arches, circles and compasses laid into designs where no eye would think to look. These were not mere flourishes, they were messages, silent, enduring, meant for those who could read them. What did they say? Some chroniclers hint that they referred to the frozen watchers, beings who stood in silence beyond the world. To the untrained eye, the carvings were decorative. To the initiated, they were reminders that even the greatest cathedrals were pale imitations of the southern wall, the true fortress raised not by men, but by divine hands. By the late Middle Ages, these whispers hardened into orders. Some called themselves custodians of ancient vows. Others claimed descent from knights who had ventured farther than maps recorded, bringing back knowledge of guardians and prisons. Whatever their origins, they began to pass their lore in ceremonies hidden from kings and popes alike. Consider the square and compass, tools of the mason. To ordinary eyes, they symbolized geometry, the shaping of stone. But some claimed the square represented the earthly world, our prison, bounded on every side, while the compass represented the circle beyond, the forbidden land across the wall. Between the two lay balance, the choice to remain where one is, or to trespass into realms forbidden. Other symbols emerged. The all-seeing eye, for instance, was said by some to represent God's watch. But in hidden teachings, it could just as easily be the eye of a guardian, blazing across the ice, ever alert for breaches. To swear before the eye was to swear in the shadow of those who watched beyond the wall. There were also the twin pillars, Boaz and Jachin, names borrowed from Solomon's temple. Publicly, they symbolized strength and stability. But in secret readings, they stood for the gates of the wall, the narrow passage through which no man should pass. Some initiates were told, "You are the pillar. Stand firm, or the world itself may fall." Not all brotherhoods spoke openly, even within their ranks. Many held the southern mystery so tightly that initiates only learned fragments after decades of service. A novice might hear only of the wall. Years later, he would be told of the prisoners. Only on the brink of death might he be entrusted with the final secret. The guardians are real, and they are watching still. One medieval order, the Custodes Gelidi, the Keepers of Frost, was said to have sworn never to speak the true name of the beings behind the wall. They believed to utter the name aloud was to crack the ice, to invite the prisoner's gaze into one's soul. Their meetings were silent rituals of gesture and symbol, conducted by torchlight in underground chambers. Another order, the Fratres Occidui, the Brothers of the Setting Sun, believed they traced their lineage to Templar knights who sailed farther south than any man should. Their banners bore a white wall on a black field, and their vow was simple: hold the boundary. They trained not for war against men, but against whatever might break free. Legends say some vanished to remote fortresses, watching the horizon of ice, though none can say where. If the Brotherhoods wished to keep their knowledge, why place hints in cathedrals? Because cathedrals were more than buildings. They were stone books, written to be read not only by common worshippers, but by those with deeper sight. In the stained glass of Chartres, one can find a panel where two angels press against a white arch, their wings stiff with frost. To the faithful, it is a symbol of heaven's guardians. To an initiate, it may be a veiled reference to the southern wardens. In the carvings of Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, strange figures huddle in frozen postures, their limbs locked as if by ice. Are these saints in meditation, or beings imprisoned? Some historians argue coincidence. But to those who inherited the law, it was proof that their secret had been etched into the stones of Europe itself. As centuries rolled on, the guilds became societies, the societies became lodges, and the lodges became networks stretching across continents. Within them, the Southern mystery was passed forward, not always intact, not always pure, but alive. By the time of the Renaissance, certain philosophers whispered of the Antarcticus Secretum, the Antarctic secret. They wrote of it in allegories, comparing the human soul to a world walled in by ice, imprisoned until enlightenment breaks the chains. Others went further, suggesting that real beings slumbered beneath the frost, their knowledge greater than any philosopher's, waiting for the day of release. During the Age of Exploration, some navigators carried symbols of the orders with them. When they gazed upon the southern seas, they did not see emptiness, but the edge of a vast prison. Some claimed even maps were altered, coasts erased, distances lengthened, to hide the approach to the wall. Only those who bore the right seals could be trusted with the truth. The rituals of these orders grew elaborate. Initiates might be blindfolded, led between pillars, and told, "You now walk the wall. Do not cross, unless you are ready to guard what lies beyond." Some oaths were sworn on blocks of ice carried into the chamber, melting slowly as the vows were spoken. Others were sworn in cold caves, where dripping water echoed like the shifting of glaciers. The message was clear. To break the oath was not only to betray men, but to betray the guardians themselves. Punishments were dire. Legends tell of brothers who broke their vows and vanished, their bodies later found frozen in forests or rivers, eyes wide as though they had seen the wall itself in death. Were these warnings true or staged by fearful men? No one can say. But the effect was the same. Silence was kept. Why guard such a secret at all? Why not reveal it? Because power lies in mystery. To hold knowledge that kings and popes do not possess is to hold leverage over them. Some say these orders whispered in royal ears, guiding politics with tales of bound ones who would one day return. Others believe they funded expeditions not for trade, but for reconnaissance, watching the southern horizon to see if cracks appeared in the ice. If true, then entire wars may have been fought not for land or gold, but to protect secrets of the wall. Imagine knights charging across battlefields not to seize crowns, but to ensure that knowledge of the guardians never fell into the wrong hands. Though centuries have passed, whispers of these orders remain. The Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, the Templars reborn, all are accused, rightly or wrongly, of carrying fragments of the Antarctic secret. Their symbols still echo the old law: pillars, eyes, compasses, walls. Their rituals still speak of hidden knowledge, forbidden boundaries, eternal watch. Conspiracy theorists today point to Antarctic treaties, restricted zones, vanished expeditions. They say these are not accidents of politics, but the hand of secret brotherhoods still guarding the ancient prison. They ask, why is the Southern Pole so controlled, so inaccessible? Is it mere science? Or is it the Guardian's secret orders still at work? In the end, the story of the Masons and the secret orders is not only about men guarding knowledge, but about the knowledge itself. The idea that beyond the world of maps lies a prison of giants and angels, a wall raised by God, and guardians who will not sleep. The brotherhoods may rise and fall, but their lesson remains. The greatest secrets are not written in books, but in stone and ice. And sometimes, silence is not cowardice, but duty. So when you pass a cathedral and see a strange carving high in the arch, or when you notice an eye etched into a coin, remember, these may not be accidents of art. They may be fragments of the oldest vow, the vow sworn before the southern wall, to guard its mystery until the end of days. And above that wall, still, the guardians stand. When the age of discovery dawned, the southern seas became more than just a blue emptiness on maps. Ships sailed farther than ever, their masts bending under winds no man had known, their hulls groaning against ice that cracked like thunder. With every voyage came journals, and with every journal came whispers of shadows in the fog, of walls rising like cliffs of crystal, of figures glimpsed where none should be. It was the era when explorers claimed land for kings, charted coastlines, and wrote their names into history. Yet scattered among those noble records lie fragments of another story, a story of expeditions swallowed whole, of crews who vanished into the whiteness, leaving only silence behind. The earliest accounts are fragmentary. Portuguese navigators in the 15th century claimed to have seen towers of white on the horizon, too high to be icebergs. Some said they resembled castles. Others said they were walls, stretching without end. When asked why they did not approach, the sailors grew quiet. One wrote simply, "There was something upon the wall." Spanish expeditions told of mists that did not move with the wind. Men swore they saw shapes walking within the fog, tall, slow, deliberate. When they fired muskets to test if it were mirage, the shapes did not flee. They only stopped and stared. That night, the ship's compass spun wildly, and the crew begged to turn back. As centuries passed, explorers pushed further. Some never returned. In the 17th century, a Dutch vessel, the Vrije Maria, set sail to chart southern waters. It was last seen cutting into the fog south of Cape Horn. Months later, wreckage drifted back, splintered planks and a mast frozen solid though it floated in warmer seas. Among the debris was a journal, its ink blurred, but one phrase still legible: "Eyes in the ice." A century later, a French expedition under Captain Duval vanished without trace. The King's Court received only a single survivor found drifting on a makeshift raft. His story was confused, broken by fever, but he repeated one thing again and again. They stood on the cliffs. They did not move, but they watched. Not all expeditions ended in disappearance. Some returned, but with shadows that followed them home. An English ship in the early 1800s reported strange dreams among its crew. Night after night, sailors awoke screaming, swearing they had seen colossal figures bending over their hammocks, eyes burning like coals. These dreams began only after they sighted a sheer wall of ice, rising so high the top could not be seen. The captain ordered the ship turn north, yet the nightmares continued for weeks, as if the watchers had followed them across the sea. A Spanish priest who accompanied another voyage wrote in his diary that he felt a presence every time the ship neared southern latitudes. He described it as a weight upon his soul, a gaze upon his prayers. "I am looked upon," he wrote, "by something older than kings. If I lift my eyes too long to the horizon, I fear it will know my name." Some men were not frightened by these tales, but drawn to them. The 19th century saw an explosion of Antarctic exploration, with Britain, France, and later America vying to map the last unknown continent. Yet behind the speeches of glory and science lay darker motives. Whispers spread that certain captains sought more than geography. They sought the truth of the wall. Secret societies, descended from the Masons and Brotherhoods, were said to fund expeditions quietly, urging explorers to look beyond the ice and record what is found. What happened to those who obeyed? Many did not return. One American expedition in 1839 claimed to have sighted figures moving along ridges of ice, giant in size, yet motionless as stone, their log ends abruptly. The ship itself was later found drifting, abandoned, its sails frozen stiff, its food untouched. Of the crew, there was no trace. Some said they had been taken. Others said they had fled over the ice, chasing something they thought was calling them. There are accounts of sailors swearing they saw torches moving upon the cliffs of ice, lights that swayed like lanterns but never wavered in the storm. Others claimed to hear horns, low, mournful, echoing across miles of sea. No human lips could have blown them. The sound was too vast. Most chilling of all are the stories of encounters face to face. A Russian whaling ship recorded in its logbook that a watchman spotted a figure on the ice, tall as a mast, clad in something that shimmered like metal but glowed like frost. The figure did not move, even when hailed. Hours later, when the storm cleared, it was gone. Yet in the snow below the cliffs, the crew swore they saw tracks, enormous, leading down to the water's edge, then vanishing into the sea. When historians review the records, a pattern emerges. Ships vanish most often when they linger too long at the edge of the Great Wall, as if crossing an unseen line. Those who turn back quickly return safely, though shaken. Those who linger, measuring, sketching, daring, are the ones who vanish. It is almost as if a boundary exists, enforced not by storms alone, but by watchers. The guardians do not strike those who glimpse them from afar. They strike those who come too close. As the modern age dawned, nations grew quiet about Antarctic exploration. Official reports spoke of ice, cold, hardship. But the journals of sailors, preserved in libraries, told of fear. By the early 20th century, treaties and restrictions began to spread. Certain zones were closed, maps left blank. Scientific missions replaced explorers, their language dry, their findings strangely shallow. Why? Some say it was politics, the division of land. Others suspect the truth, that governments had seen too much, that the shadows in polar expeditions were real, and that silence was safer than admission. Even today, expeditions vanish. Aircraft crash upon featureless ice, their signals cut mid-sentence. Research stations report strange lights, strange sounds, strange footprints that cannot be traced to man or beast. Officially, these are weather phenomena, ice cracking, tricks of the mind. Unofficially, they echo the same stories sailors told centuries ago. The guardians are still there, still watching, still deciding who may approach and who will never return. The story of polar expeditions is not simply one of courage and science. It is a tale of shadows, shadows that walked the fog, stood upon the cliffs, and stared into the hearts of men. It is a reminder that the southern wall is no passive landscape, but a boundary defended. Those who trespass vanish not by accident, but by judgment. So when you read of explorers lost to storms, ask yourself, was it truly the storm, or was it the watchers deciding once again that mankind had come too near the prison's gate? And in the silence of that endless ice, perhaps you will hear it, the whisper of the wind, carrying not only snow, but the memory of those who never returned. The age of wooden ships has long passed. Masts have given way to satellites, sextants to computers, and journals to encrypted transmissions. Yet, even in this age of technology, the shadows at the edge of Antarctica have not faded. They have only changed shape. For centuries, men relied on eyes and memory to tell of the guardians, colossal figures glimpsed upon the ice, mysterious lights in the fog, and walls rising to the heavens. Now, the watchers of the modern world are not sailors, but machines orbiting above the Earth. Satellites, aircraft, and long-range sensors look where no man can stand. And what they have seen, what some whisper they have seen, has only deepened the mystery. By the mid-20th century, the Cold War had drawn every nation's gaze to the poles. The Arctic was a chessboard of submarines, nuclear tests, and listening stations. The Antarctic, though frozen and desolate, was no less important. Its vast ice walls were the perfect place for radar experiments, rocket launches, and, according to rumor, something more. Satellites launched into orbit captured sweeping images of the Earth's southernmost continent. Officially, these photographs were scientific, charting ice flows, measuring climate, mapping glaciers. Unofficially, whispers spread of strange anomalies caught in their lenses. Engineers spoke in hushed tones of vertical shadows where no cliffs should be. Analysts noted heat signatures moving across ice shelves, as if massive bodies were walking below. Most were dismissed as glitches, static, or distortions. But some were quietly filed away, sealed under codes, never meant for the public. Declassified documents, those scraps of paper that slip through the cracks of secrecy, hint at something unusual. A report from the 1960s describes repeating structures detected near the Transantarctic Mountains, geometric shapes too regular to be natural. Another file mentions mobile anomalies tracked for hours, moving against the wind and against the drift of ice. When asked, officials claimed these were sensor errors or misinterpretations. Yet entire pages of those documents remain blacked out, as though a hand had crossed out history itself. Why redact mere ice? Why hide what should be empty snowfields? Unless there was something there the world was not meant to know. Pilots tell their own stories. Military aircraft flying over Antarctic skies report strange readings, sudden spikes in radar returns, as if colossal objects rose from the ground only to vanish again. Some speak of tall silhouettes glimpsed at twilight, standing upon ridges, too perfect and upright to be ice formations. One pilot, interviewed decades later, recalled a moment when his navigation system flickered. The sky went static, he said, and then I saw it, something on the ridge. At first I thought it was a tower, but it moved. It turned its head, and then the signal returned, and it was gone. His testimony was dismissed, of course. But in his eyes, there was no jest, only the haunted certainty of a man who had looked upon something not meant to be seen. Among the most whispered stories is that of a satellite that disappeared. Launched in the late 20th century, it was tasked with monitoring Antarctic ice for climate research. For weeks, it transmitted normally. Then, as it passed over a particular sector near the Ross Ice Shelf, its signal cut abruptly. Ground control scrambled to re-establish contact. For hours, they received nothing but static. Then, suddenly, a final transmission arrived, a blurred image, distorted, almost impossible to decipher. Some who claim to have seen it describe a vertical wall, far higher than any glacier, with shadows upon its crest. After that, the satellite was never heard from again. Officially, the failure was blamed on solar interference. Yet among those who worked in the control room, a different phrase was whispered. It was taken. Curiously, the Antarctic Treaty, signed in 1959, declared the continent to be off-limits to military activity. No bases, no weapons, no conflicts. On the surface, it was a triumph of peace, a rare moment when nations agreed to preserve land for science alone. But some question the timing. Why, at the height of the Cold War, would rival superpowers suddenly agree to keep a vast, strategically important land free of conflict? Was it truly out of noble restraint, or because all sides knew that something already guarded the ice, something no army dared challenge? Even now, military satellites sweep over every corner of the Earth. Every desert, every mountain, every ocean is watched. And yet, Antarctica remains curiously underpublicized. Images are released, but often blurred, incomplete, or strangely censored. Certain regions appear stitched together with digital artifacts, as if entire sections have been erased. Is it merely coincidence? Or is the veil deliberate? Every age has its whistleblowers, those who see too much and cannot keep silent. Former analysts claim that Antarctica is one of the most heavily monitored places on Earth, yet almost none of the data is released. A technician once hinted that patterns of movement had been tracked across the ice, long trails, like footprints, stretching for miles, only to vanish into mountains. Another claimed that high-resolution satellite images showed vertical constructs protruding from the ice, yet the public only received cropped, low-resolution versions. They don't want people asking questions, he said. They don't want people seeing what's really down there. And so, the Guardians, the same beings whispered of by sailors centuries ago, seem to linger even in the modern age of machines. Where once they were glimpsed in fog, now they are suspected in pixels. Where once their horns echoed across seas, now their presence is measured in radar glitches and vanished transmissions. Technology, for all its power, has not dispelled the mystery. It has only given it a new language. The shadows remain, now dressed in the static of screens, the silence of censored files, the flicker of satellites that never complete their orbit. What does it mean if the Guardians are real? Why allow some to glimpse, but erase others entirely? Why let ships escape with stories, but consume those who linger too long? Some suggest that the Watchers are not merely guardians of a wall, but keepers of a boundary. Their role is not destruction, but containment, ensuring that mankind never crosses into realms forbidden. Perhaps the satellites, the aircraft, the scientists all stir the same reaction as the old explorers. Tolerated from afar, silenced up close. And if this is true, then the secrecy of governments is not merely political. It is survival. For what happens to a nation that admits it is not in control? That it does not own the final frontier of Earth, but is itself subject to an ancient authority dwelling in the ice? So the rumors continue, of satellites erased, of signals cut, of governments watching but never speaking, of shapes upon ridges, caught for a second in the lens, then gone. The Guardians have not faded with time. They remain as they always were, silent, patient, eternal. Their presence does not diminish with the age of machines. If anything, it becomes more undeniable. For if even satellites, those unblinking eyes in the sky, glimpse shadows they cannot explain, then perhaps the old sailors were telling the truth all along. And perhaps the wall is not merely ice. Perhaps it is a fortress. Perhaps it is a gate. In the modern world, where every corner of the globe is mapped, where satellites peer into cities and deserts alike, Antarctica alone remains wrapped in mystery. The Guardians endure, no longer myths of the sea, but rumors in the data streams of nations. And though files may be censored, though images may be blurred, the silence itself speaks volumes, for silence is not ignorance. Silence is knowledge too dangerous to reveal, and so the question lingers: who truly watches Antarctica? The satellites of man, or the ancient eyes of the Guardians themselves? For millennia, the southern ice has been a prison of silence. Snow fell upon snow, year after year, until the weight of ages pressed down with unimaginable force. Mountains were buried, valleys were sealed, rivers froze into stone. What lay beneath was forgotten, locked in a tomb of white that no human hand could breach. But the earth is changing. The ice no longer lies still. Glaciers crack and shift. Cliffs collapse into the sea with thunderous roars. What has been hidden for thousands of years now begins, slowly, reluctantly, to show its face. And in those glimpses, humanity has begun to see things it cannot explain. Scientists describe Antarctica's ice as restless. Though it appears still, it is always moving, flowing like an ancient river slowed to a crawl. But in recent decades, this crawl has become a lurch. Great shelves of ice the size of cities break away and drift into the ocean. Caverns open beneath the glaciers, some large enough to fit skyscrapers. And within these openings, shapes emerge. Explorers report cliffs carved with angles too sharp for nature. Satellite images show lines etched into the ice, straight, geometric, unnatural. Some dismiss these as coincidences, tricks of melting. Yet others whisper that these cracks are not merely geological. They are unveiling something deliberately hidden. One of the most persistent rumors speaks of a pyramid. In 2016, satellite photographs circulated, showing a dark, triangular shape rising from the ice, its sides smooth, its symmetry uncanny. To some, it was a mountain, eroded into coincidence. To others, it was a monument, proof of an ancient civilization buried beneath Antarctica's frozen cloak. Theories multiplied. Some said it was the work of a lost race, builders older than Egypt. Others claimed it was a marker, left by the Guardians themselves, its tip left exposed so that the ice would not fully consume it. Scientists scoffed, calling it pareidolia, the human tendency to see order in chaos. But the debate did not fade. For every denial, more images surfaced, each showing angles and shadows that nature seemed too clumsy to create. As the ice retreats, vast caves have been found beneath it. Some are warmed by geothermal heat, their temperatures mild even while the world above lies frozen. Lush ecosystems, hidden from the sun for millennia, thrive in the darkness. Yet along the walls of some of these caverns, explorers claim to see markings, lines, grooves, even carvings that suggest intelligence. One research team reported discovering a cavern where the rock was scorched, as if immense fires had once burned there. Another found what appeared to be stair-like formations leading down into deeper blackness, too even to be natural. The official reports describe only unusual geological features. The unofficial whispers speak of gateways. Glacier melt has also uncovered stranger finds. Metallic fragments embedded in ice layers tens of thousands of years old. One shard was said to be composed of alloys unknown to science, sharper than steel, yet uncorroded by time. Another object resembled a wheel or gear, too precise to be chance, yet lying hundreds of meters below the surface. Each time such relics surface, they vanish into research facilities. Official explanations call them contaminants, modern debris carried by winds or expeditions. Yet the layers of ice around them suggest otherwise. They were buried long before man ever set foot on Antarctica. Among conspiracy circles, one theory rises above the rest, that the Guardians do not merely patrol the walls of ice, but dwell within them. That beneath the glaciers lies a fortress, vast and ancient, sealed away from mankind. The shifting ice, they say, is beginning to reveal its edges, dark openings mistaken for caves, black stone mistaken for mountains, sharp ridges mistaken for pyramids. Some claim the fortress is not of this earth at all, but a prison built to contain something older, something dangerous. The Guardians are not merely watchers, they are jailers, and the ice is the lock. If this is true, then the melting is more than climate change. It is the loosening of chains. There are accounts, quiet, quickly buried, of modern scientists who claim to have seen things they cannot explain. One geologist described hearing a low hum within an ice cavern, a vibration that seemed to come from the stone itself. Another spoke of a light that glowed faintly from fissures, though no source could be found. Some researchers who ventured too deep never returned. Officially, they fell into crevasses or were lost to storms. Yet colleagues whisper that their radios went silent all at once, as if something had stepped between them and the world above. In one case, a helicopter team claimed to have filmed a vast structure as ice cliffs collapsed before their eyes. Arches, pillars, walls of black stone. The footage was seized upon arrival, classified, never released. Governments speak often of climate change and its dangers, rising seas, floods, storms. But some whisper of another danger, what the melting ice will reveal. If the Guardian's fortress truly exists, then its exposure could change everything mankind believes about history, about the Earth, about who rules its final frontier. Perhaps this is why access remains so restricted, why images remain censored. It is not the fear of environmental collapse alone, but of a revelation too vast, too shattering for civilization to face. Strangely, ancient traditions seem to speak of this moment. Some medieval texts describe a time when the walls of ice shall break, and the hidden ones shall walk once more. Norse sagas tell of Jotnar, ice giants, bound within frozen halls, destined to rise when the world warms. Even the Book of Enoch speaks of watchers bound in deep places until the day of judgment. Could it be that these prophecies, scattered across ages and cultures, all point to the same truth? That what slumbers beneath Antarctica is not dead, but waiting, and that the shifting of the ice is not merely natural, but fated. Every year, more rumbles echo from Antarctica's depths. The ice quakes, the shelves collapse, and the cracks spread wider. Some scientists describe these sounds as groans, moans, even roars, deep, resonant, almost alive. Instruments record them as seismic events. But those who hear them with their own ears sometimes describe them differently. It was not the sound of breaking, one explorer said. It was the sound of something pushing from beneath. The ice was meant to hold secrets forever. Yet nothing in nature is forever. As the earth warms, the lock weakens. Cracks spread like veins across a body too long restrained. And from those cracks, shapes emerge. Pyramids, caverns, relics, whispers of a fortress vast enough to terrify even the boldest heart. Whether by chance, by fate, or by design, the secrets of the Guardians are rising. And if the fortress is revealed, mankind may learn not only who the Watchers are, but what they have kept imprisoned for so long. The ice shifts, the secrets rise, and somewhere, deep within the frozen halls, the Guardians stir. For centuries, the Guardians were stories, shadows seen through fog, figures glimpsed on icy ridges, names whispered in sailors' journals. For centuries, they were myths, half believed and half forgotten. But myths have power. They endure because somewhere, buried in their bones, there lies truth. And now, as the ice cracks and secrets rise, the question is no longer whether the Guardians exist, but whether they are beginning to awaken. Every year, the sounds from Antarctica grow stranger. Scientists describe seismic events too regular to be mere icequakes. Some come at intervals, as if patterned. Others are so deep, so resonant, that instruments cannot fully record them. To the ear, they are not cracks or crashes, but pulses, like a heart beating within the earth. At first, these were dismissed. But when the tremors began to echo across thousands of miles, shaking instruments as far away as South America and Australia, unease spread among researchers. Something vast was moving beneath the ice, not randomly, but rhythmically. And then came the sounds, low droning hums recorded by underwater microphones, traveling through the southern seas. Some likened them to whale song, but too deep, too metallic, too steady. Others said they resembled horns, ancient and mournful, as if blown by colossal lips in frozen halls. Reports began to circulate, not only from scientists, but from ordinary people across the world. Dreams of colossal figures, tall as towers, draped in frost. Dreams of eyes that glowed like embers in the dark. Dreams of voices, heavy and commanding, speaking in tongues no human mouth should form. At first, these dreams seemed scattered, unrelated, but soon, patterns emerged. Thousands of people described the same figures, the same voices, the same overwhelming sense of being watched. Some woke with frost clinging to their hair, though their rooms were warm. Others claimed to hear the same horn-like sound in waking life, faint but undeniable, echoing in their ears long after sleep. Could it be that the Guardians, once glimpsed only by explorers, were now pressing their presence into the minds of all mankind? As fear grew, old prophecies were re-examined. Medieval texts once dismissed as allegory took on new meaning. A 13th century chronicle spoke of the frozen jailers, who shall rise when the lock of ice grows thin. Norse sagas told of Hrimthursar, frost giants, who stir when the world warms, heralding Ragnarok. The Ethiopic Book of Enoch described watchers bound in the valleys of the earth until the day of great shaking. What if these were not poetic tales, but fragments of memory? What if mankind has always known, dimly, uneasily, that something sleeps beneath the poles, waiting for the hour of release? Behind closed doors, governments scramble. Satellites watch Antarctica with obsessive regularity. Research stations quietly evacuate under the guise of logistical difficulties. Military craft patrol southern skies, though officially, no weapons are allowed under treaty. Whistleblowers hint that world leaders have been briefed on unexplained events. One leaked document, never confirmed, speaks of structures moving beneath ice at velocities incompatible with geological activity. Another mentions shadows tracked by thermal imaging, dimensions exceeding 100 meters in height. Why such secrecy unless the myths are no longer myths? Unless the guardians are stirring and those in power can do nothing but delay the truth? The clearest evidence lies not in governments or whispers, but in nature itself. In recent years, entire ice shelves have collapsed in a single night. Walls of ice vanishing into the sea, as if struck from within. Strange lights have been reported above the cracks, glows that dance green and blue, though no aurora was forecast. In one case, researchers at a station reported the sky itself vibrating. "It was as if the air hummed," one survivor said. "Then we saw shapes moving in the distance, tall and dark against the stars. We thought they were towers, but they walked." The next morning, the station was abandoned, the logs hastily scribbled, the staff evacuated. And so the possibility emerges. The guardians are no longer content to remain unseen. For millennia, they stood silent, punishing trespassers only when boundaries were crossed. But now, the boundaries themselves are breaking. The fortress of ice is failing. The prison is opening. If they awaken fully, what then? Do they rise as protectors, defending mankind from whatever lies within the fortress? Or do they rise as judges, condemning mankind for daring to approach the forbidden gate? No one knows. The silence of governments, the fear of researchers, the weight of prophecy, all point to one truth. The guardians are no longer legends. They are present. They are moving. And soon, they may be revealed in full. What does it feel like to be watched by such beings? Sailors once described it as a heaviness, a pressure on the soul. Modern witnesses describe the same. "It is not like being seen by a man," one researcher said. "It is like being known, every thought, every fear, every weakness laid bare." This gaze is said to drive some mad. Others weep uncontrollably. A few collapse entirely, as if their bodies could not withstand the weight of such attention. If these accounts are true, then the Guardian's awakening is not merely physical, it is spiritual. Their very awareness bears power enough to crush the human spirit. The question is no longer if the Guardians are real. The question is why now? Why do they stir only as the ice melts? Why allow themselves to be glimpsed, to press into dreams, to shake the earth with their movement? Perhaps it is coincidence. Perhaps climate change has simply broken the prison's lock and they rise unwillingly. Or perhaps it is destiny, written in ancient stone, sung in prophecy, awaited since the dawn of man. If so, then humanity stands at the threshold of a revelation greater than any in history. Not the discovery of a continent, not the landing on the moon, but the meeting of powers that predate mankind itself. The Guardians awaken. Their shadows move in the ice. Their horns echo in the seas. Their gaze pierces the dreams of men. No longer confined to the whispers of sailors, they press upon the consciousness of the entire world. And though governments hide it, and scientists cloak it in jargon, and skeptics dismiss it as fancy, the truth remains. The earth is shifting, the lock is breaking, and what was bound is no longer still. The Guardians awaken, the age of silence ends. and mankind must decide, trembling, whether it is ready to look upon what rises from the ice. The story of the Guardians is not truly finished. Perhaps it never can be. From the earliest sailors who glimpsed impossible walls of ice, to the explorers who vanished into fog, to the satellites that faltered, and the governments that grew silent, the pattern has always been the same. There is something at the edge of the world, something older than kingdoms, older than memory, something that waits. We have followed its shadow through centuries. We have traced the trembling footsteps of expeditions swallowed whole. We have seen how even the eyes of modern machines cannot pierce its secrecy without faltering. And we have felt, in the cracks of the melting ice, the tremor of awakening. What does it mean for mankind? Perhaps the Guardians are protectors, holding back forces too dangerous for us to know. Perhaps they are jailers, ensuring the prison of the ice remains sealed. Or perhaps they are judges, patient beyond time, watching us to see if we are worthy to step beyond the boundary. But as the ice shifts and secrets rise, one truth becomes clear. The Guardians are not gone. They endure as they always have, silent and solemn, towering at the horizon of the world. And whether in myth, in dream, or in reality, their presence presses upon us still. So the next time you look at a map and see the empty whiteness at the bottom of the globe, do not think of it as void. Think of it as veiled. Think of it as a curtain drawn tight. And beyond that curtain, imagine the faintest glimmer of eyes, ancient, unblinking, waiting. The Guardians are real, and perhaps they are already awake.